Hey guys, how are you doing? Welcome to the Burn podcast. As you guys know how I work, I always jump right in. And I have a badass today, Miss Tiffany Toombs today. And I just want you guys to really lean into a lot of this today because I'm sure we could probably talk for like 5 hours on a lot of what Tiffany offers. But Tiffany, introduce yourself, tell everybody, what you're doing. And of course, I like to dive into what you've had to burn through. And I know you're helping people burn through a lot of things as well.
Yeah. So thanks for having me, Brandy. I specialize in helping people overcome the limiting beliefs, self-sabotage, fear, self-doubt, all the like gross stuff that keeps people stuck and not fully living their life full out, and help them step back into their power, purpose, and potential. So I can't remember the second question that you asked me.
Yeah, just I like to dive into, what you've had to burn through. How did you even get there?
Yeah. So I've been coaching in one form or another actually since I was 14 years old. I started in the fitness industry at 14. I was like as obsessive now as I am with understanding trauma and its impacts. I was obsessed with the body back then, which has actually really helped me kind of put together both aspects when I was growing and developing. But back then I didn't realize that I was so obsessed with fitness and helping people feel comfortable in their skin because I really wasn't. And really the time that I got started in the fitness industry, I had eating disorders. I was battling eating disorders of my own because I needed a sense of control. I needed to feel worthy. And I just thought that if I could have the perfect body, then I would be worthy and lovable. So my story really goes back way before then. When I was a kid, I had two very different childhoods. I had an amazing childhood with my biological mom and my stepdad. He's really the man who raised me. He's got his name tattooed here. So he's really my dad. And my brothers, and then a completely different life of really just surviving when I was with my biological dad and my stepmom. So my stepmom was a domestic violence survivor. She'd been abused severely, like physically abused in her previous 3 relationships. And even though my biological father was mentally abusive, he never laid a hand on her. And so I think for her, it was like that relationship was a little bit of a reprieve. And so when they got together and she moved in, anytime the attention was on me or not on her and her kids, then the abuse started. And so it started out mildly with being locked in closets and burned with curling irons. After years of telling me that strangers hated blonde-haired, blue-eyed girls, which I am, and would kill them if they saw them, she put me into the car one day. I was being too loud playing with my cousins, put me into the car, drove me to the outskirts of the city that I'm from, and told me to get out. She was just going to leave me there. She had enough of me. She was going to let a stranger do what they did. And so I begged for my life first at 7. Then again, a couple years later, I was away with them at a family reunion, got car sick coming home, and she threatened that if I didn't keep my mouth shut, that I would never see my family again, and she would kidnap me and take me away. So that kind of happened up until about the age of 10, and then they moved to the other side of Canada. I'm from Canada originally. They moved to the other side of Canada, and the fear and the terror was replaced with a little bit of like, I never have to deal with this again, and abandonment. Because for me, it didn't clue into my child mind that she chose the moments when my biological dad wasn't there to abuse me. I just thought he didn't care enough and didn't love me enough to protect me. And then he chose her over me, which made it like so much worse. And so for me, I carried around this huge chip on my shoulder. I believed that it wasn't safe enough to be myself. It wasn't safe enough for me to be on stage, and I'm a natural performer. It wasn't safe enough for me to speak out and share my truth. I wasn't worthy. I wasn't lovable. And so all of that ultimately landed me in toxic relationship, toxic friendship, toxic business partnerships over and over and over and over. And so that really came to a head after I finished college. I moved to Australia. And
oh, wow. That's a big jump.
Yeah. I lived in Australia for like 8 years. It was amazing. I loved it. And it was totally a process of like breaking down who I was to become who I was meant to be. And so while I was there, I was dating somebody for about 3 years. He was telling people he was getting ready to propose and whatnot. And on the day I found out I was pregnant was the day I found out he actually had a girlfriend in another state, and my entire life collapsed. From there, I found out that he was actually a compulsive liar, which apparently a lot of people knew, and they just thought that I knew about the lies. Which I didn't. So then I went into like a spiral of like shame and beating myself up. Like, I'm a highly intelligent woman. How could I not know this? How could I fall for this? I mean, he went as far as forging a bank statement to show that he had $50,000 in the bank because he wanted to put an offer in on a block of land. And I was like, we don't have money. Like, what are you doing? And he was like, no, I've been saving money. And I was like, no, you haven't. And I was like, you're lying to me. He brought home a bank statement and it looked legit because I already didn't believe him. So I went over that thing with a fine tooth comb and I believed him. Like, it looked real. And so I kind of went through this spiral of like, how could I be so stupid? I was so embarrassed about the infidelity that I didn't tell anybody I was pregnant. And then I ended up miscarrying the baby. And that totally took me to a whole new low that I never would have expected. At that point, I wasn't even sure that I wanted to be a mom, but it was like this moment of like, I have a human being growing inside of me. That's pretty awesome. And then like, it was just gone. And so I didn't tell anybody about my miscarriage either. And so for 6 months, I dealt with that alone. And that came to head. I was standing on the corner in downtown Melbourne one Friday afternoon after a meeting, pretending everything was okay, pretending I was good. And I saw a cab coming and I was like, that's my ticket out of here. That is how I stop this pain from happening. And so mentally I committed to taking this step. Physically, my feet were like cemented to the ground. I couldn't move, and which probably ended up being a good thing because then I started the healing journey. And I found a lot of things that didn't work on the journey. And I found a lot of things that obviously did. And I use those now to help others.
So a lot to unpack. And I knew some of your story just because we've been connected for a while and a lot of relatable things for myself as well. Going through severe trauma as a child, the toxic relationships and business relationships and all of those things. So, my biggest hope for anyone listening, and whether it be a male or female, because we really got to understand it's both genders go through this. A lot of people think that it's just women, but the biggest thing I'd say I'd want to unpack first is, as a child, I know I heard you say the term, you wish that your dad, your biological father, had really done more. And I remember going through a lot of those same things. In my past, I actually didn't meet my real father until I was 17. And that was not a fun relationship at all. And so it always made me feel less than. It made me feel like I didn't deserve, like, what's wrong with me? And so, when you're working with people, one of the things is how do you burn through that? But also for me now, having a daughter and a son and not wanting them, if something like that were to happen, helping them understand it's not you, but it's still part of your life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is like helping people understand what trauma is. I avoided any form of healing. I mean, I knew that I had stuff. I knew I had a block on my shoulder. I was super angry and my family just could not understand why, right? Like, I was so angry that if you said something that offended me, and I was super sensitive, if you said anything that offended me and you were within an arm's reach, I would slap you before either of us knew. It was like my hand had a mind of its own, and I would just be like, whack. And then I'd be like, I'm so sorry. I did not mean to slap you. But I had so much anger pent up. And I remember attempting to have conversations with my mom and with other family members, like, I feel abandoned. I feel rejected. And the conversation that came back was usually things like, you have this great man, who accepted you like he's your own, like you're his own daughter and loves you. And most people don't even know, unless they know your story, they don't know that he's not your blood dad. And so there was kind of this, yeah, but there's this other piece. And I think people forget that like we are biologically wired to seek love and approval from our parents. So it doesn't really matter that I don't respect my biological dad. Like now looking back, I could be like, his opinion means zip to me. But growing up, that wasn't the case. Even then, I didn't like him. I thought he was a loser back then, but I still wanted his approval because that's what we're wired for. And even though I was blessed to have like a whole second family come in and cousins and aunts and uncles who loved me and grandparents who loved me and all of this and an amazing man who came in and stepped up to be dad, it doesn't take away from the fact that I was biologically wired to seek that love and approval from this person who just was not capable of giving it to me. And then for a long time, I just denied that I even had trauma because it wasn't as bad as somebody else's. And so I think in society, we also kind of compare like, oh, but there's somebody worse out there that has it. So therefore I have nothing to complain about, or I have no reason. Like we need to let go of that premise, and men do this as well, right? Well, I wasn't as bad as that person. And so I think that really stops men from coming forward, but also women. And so we need to reform our ideas of what trauma is. Oftentimes people stop themselves from burning through this and overcoming it because of the judgment, or because they're looking back on what happened to them and judging what happened to them from an adult mindset, right? Like looking back, I can see that it wasn't that I wasn't worthy. It was that she was a broken woman and hurt people. She had not dealt with the trauma that she faced in her marriages. And so I was a threat to her survival. And so she wasn't even reacting from her logical mind. She was reacting from her reptilian brain, this part of us that seeks to keep us safe and survive. That's where she was reacting from, right? This is the part of the brain where if you ever watch shows like Criminal Minds or whatever, that quiet next door neighbor guy who all of a sudden has like all these stressors slowly building up over time and then they like snap, like your Ted Kaczynski's and them, like the Unabomber, like those build up over time and they snap, and they're not even, their logical mind is not in control. It is the brain stem that is in control and is taking over to make sure that they survive. It's a very ritualistic and instinctual, no capacity for logic, no capacity for emotion. It just acts to keep the person safe. And that's where she was reacting from. So if I'm sitting here in my adult mind, who's like a science nerd and loves all this stuff and like knows that logically, looking back at my 4-year-old self saying that was a bit stupid to think that you're not good enough. Right.
Yeah.
And it stops us from truly healing, because it wasn't my adult mind with all this information that experienced that event. It was the 4-year-old mind. And even in our adult years, let's say there's sexual abuse or something happens. The other thing that I see is, people who've experienced sexual abuse later in life when they should know better in their teenage years, 20s, 30s, whatever, is their body will shut down. And people don't realize that in our fight or flight system, the next level up is freeze. And so our body totally shuts down and we can't move. So we're in a situation that we don't want to be in, right? And then people, when the victim comes forward or the survivor comes forward, one of the things people say is, well, why didn't you fight them off? Like, why didn't you try harder? They physically couldn't, right? And so those comments only keep them stuck in that place of shame, keep them stuck in that place of feeling misunderstood. When we do it to ourselves, we keep our inner children in shame, and it stops us from truly being able to go through the healing journey. So I think that's the first step that we have to take, is like, let go of the judgment, let go of the preconceived notions of, how we think people should react, because until we're in that situation, we literally have no idea. And even in that situation, we could get a million different responses depending on which part of our brain kicks in. And then in terms of, how do you parent your children through this so that they don't take it on I think the best thing that you can do is to show them your own healing journey, right? Show them that they can change and heal at any time, that this cliche saying of you can't teach an old dog new tricks is total BS, that we can grow and we can change and we can evolve anytime that we choose to. And so show them that journey and then create that relationship with them where they feel comfortable enough to come to you and say, hey, mom, or hey, dad, this really hurt me. When you made this comment, this is how I felt. And like open up those lines of communication without becoming defensive, without like, marginalizing what they're feeling, and allow them to experience what they're feeling. If they learn how to communicate what they're feeling as children, they're going to become much more effective at it as adults.
Yeah. And I think that is something I talk a lot about. I could never figure out why I couldn't finish my book. And it was because I was so worried about people reading everything and judging me all, and almost kind of reliving all of that again. But that was the biggest thing. Was I was molested as a child, kidnapped, and went through a really, it's a whole other story, but a whole other bad situation with someone that my mom had married. And literally, I never really got to talk about it. And so I just stuffed it down and kind of went on as a kid, and realized now that I'm 48, and have gone through the process, I realize how much of my life I will say that I feel like I did lose because I wasn't able to communicate those things. I held them in, and then I reacted, like you mentioned about how you would, slap people. And for me, it was always like I needed to be the perfect picture and the best at everything so that no one would see that dark, ugly side that I didn't want them to see. And then what do you end up attracting? You end up attracting exactly what you don't want.
Oh, girl, I get it. Like I was an overachiever, people pleaser, perfectionist, workaholic. Like there was no winning in that scenario for me, right? Like, and even when I started working with life coaches and going to therapists, like the first therapist I worked with was like, I don't even know how you're such a high functioning member of society. And I was like, how does that help? Like, I understand that you're telling me I've done a good job in life, but like those comments don't help me, not in this situation, right? And then life coaches be like, you can't change what happened in the past. Let's just focus on your future. And I'm like, yeah, I did that for 28 years, just about killed me. Don't really have a desire to go through that. So I think even as like coaches and therapists, like if you don't have the skills to help that person, just acknowledge that you don't have the skills to help that person and find somebody who can. Because I literally was just about to give up and be like, well, nobody knows how to heal me. Like I've been to therapists. I've spent tens of thousands of dollars that I don't really have, but I know that this is important and I can't find the solution. So I was just about to throw my hands up when I ultimately found NLP in the form of hypnosis that I use with my clients now. And that was a game changer. And like it literally, I mean, I know that nothing happens by chance. So like the universe was showing up for me there, but like it literally was like the most random of situations that I found these techniques. And that's what allowed me to change. And so the reason I'm so passionate, like I've had people say like, I don't really think that you should tell your story, right? I still have mutual friends who are connected with that ex back in Australia. And they're like, when are you going to stop blaming him? And I'm like, I'm not blaming him. In fact, I'm grateful for that situation because that was the straw that broke the camel's back to push me to stop playing small and to push me to show up for myself. It is part of my story. And if that person didn't want to be part of somebody's story, then they shouldn't have acted in that way.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
And like, I've had family members when my book came out, like, please stop telling your story. And I'm like, my story actually has nothing to do with you. And if it's bringing up stuff for you, that's an invitation for you to work on it. Right. Like, I get it. It's uncomfortable to hear that all these things were happening that you didn't know about, but ultimately my story is not about you and it's my story.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to not tell it and not inspire somebody else to go on their journey or not show somebody else that it is possible to overcome this and to make dramatic change. I mean, at the time that I went through my healing journey, I was in business with 2 narcissists. So I was dating one and in business with 2 others. And the more that I stepped into my power and the less that they could manipulate me, the more rocky things in my business became, until ultimately they forced me to resign, which forced me to leave Australia. And at the time, again, it felt like rock bottom. It felt like everything was happening to me. And then I moved back. I made an amazing man who I'm now married to. I built a 6-figure business in 12 months. In 3 years, I work with over 500 people, and I get to witness the most incredible transformations every single day. So like when things, I think people need to realize with the growth journey is that it feels like total destruction and chaos.
Yeah.
Like if you plant a seed, I'm doing a lot of gardening this year. So you plant the seed, right? The insides of the seed have to come spilling out, like the guts of the seed have to come spilling out in order for that plant to grow. And so that's what growth looks like. We have to tear down the old. If we're rebuilding an entire skyline of a city, we have to take down the buildings that don't fit the aesthetic anymore. And what does that look like? You blow it up. There's like smoke and clouds and clutter and debris and chaos everywhere. But that gives you the space to then rebuild on. And so sometimes it's going to feel like everything's falling apart. And if you're at a place where you're like, everything is happening to me, everything's falling apart, maybe that's just God, the universe, whoever it is you believe in, saying, hey, now the time's ready. And I'm just clearing stuff out of your path because I know that you're not going to take that first step on your own. And sometimes, like I was forced into that change because I'm here for a greater purpose. And if I didn't get it together then, who knows when it would have happened.
Yeah. And I think the beauty of all of that too, for me, the reason I named my business The Phoenix Factor is that I literally realized I was living that. However, there's a difference in, burning through something, rising from the ashes, and being better than you were yesterday, or going back to that same mentality, which is actually insanity, right? When we do the same thing over and over. And we've heard that cliche. So when you're going through something like this and we're talking about healing, and I know for me, it was also to recognize that it was my fault. Meaning I was, as an adult, and as I was realizing the things I was choosing, it sounds so sick to say it, but I would choose the toxic things because I knew what to expect with that. I knew what was coming. I knew how to handle that versus taking on something new. And, if someone was actually a nice guy that was coming my way, he never had a chance because that just wasn't, I was used to dealing with chaos. And if there wasn't chaos in my life, I was like, uh-oh, what the hell's going on? And I finally realized that self-sabotage. I finally realized because of you get so trained to react that way. Because I went through my first traumatic experience at 4. So, carrying that on, I know our formative years, being at that time. So one of the things I think too, when you were talking about hypnosis, you're talking about NLP, talking about all of these different things. And I know for me, I was in the same industry. I was in fitness and wellness. That was my way of covering up who I was. I tried to be the perfect person there. But going beyond that, when I started understanding more what coaching someone was, and now I've started a new adventure, which I've mentioned to you because I really hope you get involved with that. But it's doing that exact thing. We are going to have a board that actually can vet someone and qualify someone to say, here's where you fit in with your experience and who you help, right? And for us to learn how to pass it on, meaning if someone comes to you, they've been through a certain experience, and even though you do work with trauma, you can't help them. These people need to understand they're doing more harm than good. And some of them are actually licensed therapists or psychiatrists or psychologists, but it's just not their, like, I don't know. I think you said it was a therapist that told you, they couldn't believe, and I had a kind of a similar experience. So what are some things from your standpoint? I'm sure you've heard a million stories. So what are some things that people should look for if they want to start healing from trauma, whether they reached out to you or someone else? What are some key things that they should know before they open themselves up to getting help or healing, with that person, like a coach or, therapist even?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the most common misconceptions is between coach and therapist. So I am a coach and I do plenty of training around trauma so that I am trauma informed. I'm up to date on all like the top trauma theories and practices so that I can best show up for my clients. I train people in NLP techniques, and I've had therapists come through my program because they want more tools, right? Being a therapist, they're very limited by what they can do. I had a conversation about this over the weekend where if they are going to, so the DSM-5, for example, is like the diagnostic manual for therapists to use. And what they're finding is that, and there's a little bit of friction and conjecture in the psychiatry field right now, where the DSM-5 does not actually recognize behavior that has become like adapted behavior, adaptations that have been caused by trauma. And so the book, The Body Keeps Score, describes this really well. So a lot of people are actually misdiagnosed with the wrong mental health conditions and then put on the wrong medications and whatnot because they have behavior that looks like one mental health condition, but it's actually an adaptation, right? So for example, there was a study done called the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it's basically 10 questions that ask you about certain experiences that you had in childhood. And if you answer yes to one of them, every yes is 1 point. And so then they give you a score out of 10. My ACE score is 7, which is not very good. Like the diagnosis of that in itself is like not very good. People who have an ACE score of 4 or higher are, I think it's 3 times more likely to be diagnosed as having a learning disability, ADD or ADHD. And it's not necessarily that they have any of those things. It's that they're acting out in the classroom in a way that mimics and mirrors one of those 3. They are more likely, so 66% of women who have an ACE score of 4 or higher, and you would probably be 4 or higher, just like me, they are more likely to suffer from chronic depression or chronic depression-like symptoms that antidepressants won't have an impact on, because antidepressants work on a chemical imbalance, but they don't have a chemical imbalance. They have issues related to and trauma related to trauma.
It's funny you say that, because when I went through my big episode, my breaking point, whatever you want to call it, I was put on medication. And I went through several because they had really extreme effects on me. And I was on one for antidepressant for a year, along with Xanax for panic attacks, anxiety attacks. But with my background, I was like, I don't want to do this. And I kind of felt that. It was almost like my intuition told me this is not actually helping. Like, I don't have a chemical imbalance. However, this is tricky. Maybe this is something else you could touch on. However, the women in my family all had also had depression and anxiety. However, now as an adult, I know that they also went through traumatic experiences.
Yeah.
So where, I think I come from and I love the women in my family, but I'm like, I come from a lot of crazy women. So it's like, are we crazy, or did we go through these traumatic experiences as children? And now you're touching on that. So that's really interesting to get on a path of finding out. Is it because most doctors are they're going to give you a pill?
Yeah, because it's going to give you, should give you the most, right away effects, immediate effects. There was a study done at Cambridge University that found that 89% of people who had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder actually had sexual abuse coming from families, so some form of incest, growing up. And so they started to question whether or not these people actually had borderline personality disorder. I've worked with people who have been diagnosed with bipolar, who, as soon as we heal the trauma, the up and down states, the manic and depressive states go away. They don't need the Xanax. They don't have the anxiety. They don't have the fits anymore. Same with depression, same with anxiety. I've had multiple clients come off of antidepressants and anti-anxieties, overcome panic attacks. I had one woman who had been sexually abused between the ages of 4 and 12 by 2 family members. And she thought that she had dealt with it. She'd set the boundaries, cut her family out, moved to the other side of Canada. but she'd never had an orgasm. And I didn't actually know this when I first started working with her. And I don't think she really realized the impact of the work that we were doing either. But after we did 8 sessions together, she went away with her husband for a week, their typical week away in Mexico. And she was like, I hate this week away. And I was like, you're going to Mexico? That's awesome. And she was like, no, I like dread this week. And she came back and she was like, that was the most amazing week ever. Me and my husband connected in a way that we've never connected. And I had my first orgasm. She was like in her 60s. She was like, now I know what everybody's talking about. She had grown children. Like this woman had grown children, but because of the sexual abuse, because it was still hiding underneath the surface, she had panic attacks every time she was intimate with her husband. So he would have to like stop and calm her down. And, you know, like, that has a huge impact on a marriage. I had a woman who had she'd been gang raped and had a couple other instances of sexual abuse, and she was severely obese when she came to work with me. And I think it was after session 3 or 4, she messaged me and she said, you know, after every one of our sessions, and just like I've been doing with my therapist for 20 years, she'd been seeing a therapist for 20 years. I would go to the candy store. I would load up on like bulk candy. I would go home and I would just binge on this candy.
Oh, wow.
She's like, that was her routine for 20 years. So, you know, she's got obesity issues that they're linked. So we did this one session and she went home and she was like, I binged and my body was just like, nope, we're done with this. She's like, I just vomited it all up. And after every session, like that pattern was broken and she just started losing weight. Like she'd been holding on to this weight for so long. So as I was saying, within the psychology field, there are some therapists who think that the DSM-5 needs to be updated to account for trauma and the adaptations that we experience from trauma. And then there's others who are like, no, the DSM-5 is fine. So just be aware that I'm seeing a lot of therapists shifting towards a coaching space because they have more flexibility in what they can do, right? It sounds easy, change the DSM-5, you just go rewrite the whole thing. But like, I don't know how many colleges in the US alone certify people and give them degrees in psychology, right? All of those would have to change. Entire curriculums, like there is so much red tape to change the psychology and psychiatry industry, right? And it's also heavily funded by big pharmacology, but that's a whole other topic for another day. So that's unlikely to happen. So we are seeing a shift in people moving towards more coaching therapies and natural therapies. I would say the biggest thing to look for if you are looking for a therapist or a coach to work with is somebody who has done the work themselves, somebody who is not coaching or being a therapist from ego. And you'll know by how they talk about their former clients. You'll know by just how they engage with you. So somebody who is still in their ego, they're similar to how I was when I was in the fitness industry. My self-worth was attached to my clients getting results. And I was attempting to fix them as a weird way of fixing myself. And so this happens in coaching as well. I see people all the time who don't want to do the work on themselves. They attempt to spiritually bypass actually digging in and doing the work. And so spiritual teachers as well, there are some, not all, who talk like the aligned chakras and all the woo-woo stuff. They haven't actually dug in and dealt and done the work, right? They haven't actually embraced their quote unquote dark side and made friends with it. They still have a ton of skeletons in the closet. So find somebody whose self-worth is not attached to your results. With my clients, I had one message me this morning who's gone through some ups and downs, and I've just been there like holding space. When you're ready, we'll keep going, gently calling you back to the work and still recognizing that it's their journey. And so if they use guilt or shame tactics, they're coaching from ego. If their self-worth or their idea of how good they are as a coach is tied into your results, they're coaching from ego. If they claim ownership of their clients' results, I always talk about, Yeah, I always talk about I was a part of this journey. Here's what this person experienced when they did the work, but I'm just facilitating a process. I'm never going to say I made this person build their business to six figures. This person built their business to six figures because of me, right? I was a piece of the puzzle,
Mm-hmm.
and them doing the work accelerated that,
Mm-hmm.
but I will never say, "Oh, that's because of me."
Yeah.
Right? Because I used to be that kind of coach, but I've left it behind.
Same,
So
same. I can just listening to you say all of those things, even just back from when I first became a personal trainer and I got into nutrition and, I was a complete control freak, over myself because I needed to be perfect. And then, I knew exactly when I made the switch because when my clients got those results, I mean, literally it made me nothing but happy. I didn't need to be attached to any type of ownership or getting a pat on the back. But it shifted, and I had learned when I started my healing process. And the last podcast I did, I mentioned you was with one of my best friends of 16 years, Kay, and she was the one that actually we started at the same point. And I was 31 when I really will say that I started to heal, and it took me 11 years. Because I had just finished a very traumatic relationship. And then my ex-husband, when that whole thing ended, that was, like how you kind of mentioned, I was ready to drive my car into a wall and just be done with everything. But it's just interesting where we are in this world. And so many people need to understand that. And I will say, unfortunately, the reason that someone became a coach or became a health coach or became a is for that reason. They went through something and this is their way of controlling it for themselves. And however, the results they're getting are not theirs, right? It's what the coach wanted to get for themselves, but they haven't done the work. So even, with like, once again, with a lot of things you're talking about, I can hear a huge difference just in your language that you're using and how you're approaching it. And I love that you brought that up. So I hope everyone listening, if they decide to, reach out, obviously I would love for them to reach out to you, but regardless of who they reach out to, is you really do need to listen to the language that they're using and to see where it's coming from.
Yeah, there will be subtle cues like, there's this weird trend right now of like hating on people who do things different to you. Like, again, it's coming from ego or this need to control. Like everybody has to be like me. My way is the best. If somebody tells me that they sign up with another NLP trainer, I'm like, in my head, I'm like, oh, mine's better. But I'm not going to tell them that, right? Like, I just know that I can deliver better service because I can. But I'm not going to go out and be like, that person. And I would never put down another coach, even if I'm like, I definitely know that person coaches from ego, right? Mm-hmm. Because if that's the person, if that's the coach that somebody was attracted to, then, if I know that only negative things might come from it, I can set up some support and hold space for that person. But there was a reason that they were attracted to that coach in the first place. And there's a lesson in there for them. And so, if they're bad mouthing other people, if they're bad mouthing, even if they're bad mouthing like people from their life, you will never hear me bad mouth my stepmom, my biological dad. You'll never hear me bad mouth my ex, because all of those experiences now coming out the other side of my healing, I'm grateful for every single one of them. And I've had people say like, I wish you didn't date that loser. And I'm like, I needed that experience. And then, well, I wish you hadn't wasted 3 years of your life. But if it had been one day less, then I wouldn't have been as emotionally invested. It wouldn't have brought me to my knees in the way that needed to happen for me to break apart and be put back together. Mm-hmm. So I have nothing but gratitude for those people. It doesn't mean I need them in my life. I just have nothing but gratitude for those experiences. And so they were on their journey and I'm on mine. And so if you really listen and watch somebody's behavior, you'll know if they're walking the walk. And it's not to say, like there are times where I get frustrated with a client where I'm like, oh, why are you in self-sabotage again? And again, I come back to like, I'm frustrated, but I'm not going to turn that frustration into shaming them because they're not doing what I want them to, right?
Yeah.
I can see the pattern. I can ask them questions to lead them to the aha moment. That's the other one, by the way. If you're working with a coach who tells you how you're feeling or who tells you the beliefs you have, they're probably coaching from ego. Whereas if you're working with a coach who asks a lot of questions, and they might be leading questions, I ask a ton of leading questions. The purpose is to lead the person to have their own breakthrough of like, yeah. One of my coaches once told me, they were like, you don't really like yourself very much. And I'm oppositional defiant. That was one of my adapted behaviors that I got. And I was like, I love myself. Don't tell me anything, right? And I went into this place of like totally shutting down. So now if I see a client, I'll just ask them like, hey, I just have a piece of intuition that's come through. I'm going to share it with you. You tell me if this is true for you. And if it's not, it's cool. I'm not attached to being right. I just want to share with you. And 9 times out of 10, they're like, yeah, that totally is what's going on for me. But it allows them to own it and have an aha moment as opposed to being told, right? If you tell them, then in that coach-client relationship, you're the parent, they're the child, and you're keeping them disempowered because the child only has so much power. Whereas if you're having an adult to an adult conversation energetically and spiritually, where you're like, hey, Brandy, is just getting a piece coming through. Tell me if this is true for you. And then you have the opportunity to own it and be like, yeah, that actually is true for me. And I've never thought of it that way, but it opens you up, right? So if you're working with somebody who likes to tell you what to think all the time, then they're probably coaching from ego as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally see that. So I think probably, because I know we're getting close on time, but I think another thing I just kind of want to end on is if someone's listening right now or at any point, in the future to this podcast, and they have been through trauma recently, or whether it be, 10 years ago, like for me, there was no one in my immediate life at the time when you start thinking to yourself that you want something different. You want to let it go. You don't want to feel, I lived so much of my life feeling a way that I didn't need to own that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
If they feel like they don't have anywhere to turn or anywhere to go in their immediate life, where do they go?
I mean, you can always reach out to me. I'm here for everybody. Even if I'm not your cup of tea, I'll still support you in finding that. I think the good thing about social media is that it makes it easier to connect with people who will support you. And so there are support groups. There are groups of women or groups of men on Facebook where you can go in and you can share your story, and you know, nobody really knows you, so you can be as open as you want to be in there. I think the beautiful thing about social media is that it has made it easier for us to connect with people who will support us. There's a saying or a social media meme that goes around like, nobody will support you like a social media friend that you've never met. And I've literally found that to be totally true. Some of the people who supported me the most on my social media or on my healing journey were people that I had connected with on social media who had never met me in person. And so I think, you know, utilize social media. There are other support groups. I know there's a whole bunch of like mental health apps that you can jump on where you can talk to a therapist either anonymously or just through an app or through the phone. The pandemic has made a lot of telehealth super accessible to people. So there's always options. And just know that, like, if all else fails, literally shoot me a message and I will be happy to point you in the direction of somebody who would be a good resource for you if I'm not your cup of tea or if I can't help you.
And to me, ultimately, out of everything you've said, that is the sign of a good coach as well, right? Is that, you know, you're saying you have to know someone can come to me, and I always tell people that I'm like, I may not be able to help you, but I'll have an answer. I'll find an answer. I'll find a resource, a tool, a tip, or whatever, you know, for them. So, well, awesome. Well, tell everybody how to find you in case they do want to reach out and they do want to learn more. And I hope to actually have you on our new venture, which is the telewellness community, which is where we're vetting, you know, professionals for fitness, wellness, mental health, and just so that people know it's a safe space to come in and find someone, you know, really qualified. But so I'm excited. We'll have to jump on that one as well and take a little deeper dive into the actual art of coaching and how do people get people to understand it. But tell everyone how to find you.
Yeah. So easiest way would either be on social media. So facebook.com/Tiffany.Toombs, or my website, bluelotusmind.com. That'll connect you to me everywhere. If you shoot me a Facebook message or an Instagram message or anything like that, and I don't respond in 24 hours, just bump it back up, just like send a wave or whatever, smiley face, bump it back up to the top of my messenger. Cause I actually I know a lot of coaches don't do this, or a lot of entrepreneurs don't do this. I personally do manage my own DMs just because I do have people reaching out and sharing, and I don't want like a VA going in and people think they're talking to me, but they're actually talking to a VA. So I do manage all my DMs. I will get back to you. So just like bump it up to the top. Sometimes I get like 100 messages a day. So just bump it back up to the top. Let me know that you're there, and I'll get back to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, for sharing. I definitely think people are going to get a lot out of this, and I hope they'll reach out to you if they want to learn more.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Bye, guys.